A U.S. intelligence review of the pandemic's China origins due today, but the public will have to wait to see a non-classified version. A report says Beijing pressured the World Health Organization. That's to dismiss the Wuhan lab leak theory. The Chinese Communist Party retaliates against a Malaysian singer, all because he compared the regime's authoritarian power tactics with the Taliban's. American troops are still leaving Afghanistan, while Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative suffers inside Afghanistan's neighbor. And China's population may be shrinking faster than any other nation's. Chinese women gave birth to just 1.3 children on average last year. And even the nation's new policy changes may not be able to reverse the trend. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A 90-day U.S. intelligence review of COVID-19's China origin was due on Tuesday. But according to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, the unclassified version is likely to be released to the public in a few days. In May, U.S. President Biden ordered aides to find answers to the origin of the coronavirus within 90 days, especially whether it leaked from a Chinese lab. Beijing cast the order as political manipulation. As the review's deadline draws near, Beijing hit out at the U.S., calling the Biden administration's review anti-science, saying it would not be based on truth. At the same time, Beijing has ramped up efforts to push its own version of the lab leak theory this week, including whether the virus slipped out of a lab on a U.S. Army base in Maryland. Meanwhile, China has refused to give U.S. researchers the needed access to the Wuhan lab and dismissed the theory that the virus may have escaped from there. In past weeks, the W.H.O. has tried and failed to convince Beijing to sign up for the next phase of its origin tracing plan. A World Health Organization research team that previously described Wuhan virus lab leak theory as extremely unlikely is changing its tune. Now the team's leader admits the statement was driven by pressure from China. The WHO team traveled to China earlier this year to probe the origins of the CCTV virus, the infection that causes COVID-19. Before leaving China, team leader Ben Embarek told reporters that a lab leak was extremely unlikely. When asked by a Danish TV station if that wording was a Chinese requirement, he said it was the category we chose to put it in at the end, yes. Embarek says Chinese officials refused to discuss the lab leak scenario, and any further investigation into it was dismissed. But other comments from Embarek suggest otherwise. First of all, Embarek says wild horseshoe bats aren't found in the Wuhan region. He explains that means the patient zero could have been a lab worker. He also points out another concern. In December of 2019, a Chinese lab moved into a new building less than half a mile from Wuhan's now notorious wet market, the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. Embarek says virus samples in bats could have been moved outside of secure rooms during transfer, and that could have increased the possibility of a lab leak. According to the Washington Post, a book due to be published on Tuesday points to a similar story. It reveals when the WHO dismissed the lab leak theory in February, senior WHO staff were actually shocked. One staff member has told the book's authors, "We fell off our chairs." The WHO released a statement this month announcing the second phase of its virus origin probe. But that news hasn't sat well with China. In July, Chinese officials said they would not accept any further investigation into the virus origin inside China. Territorial conflict in the South China Sea has been a regional flashpoint for years. Commenting on the situation, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris spoke in Singapore Tuesday. She blamed Beijing for endangering peace in the contested region. Here's more.
We know that Beijing continues to coerce, to intimidate, and to make claims to the vast majority of the South China Sea.
In a speech on Tuesday, Vice President Kamala Harris accused Beijing of coercion and intimidation in the South China Sea. She made the comment while visiting Singapore, the first stop on her Southeast Asia trip. Harris called the Chinese Communist regime's claims in the disputed waters unlawful.
Beijing's actions continue to undermine the rules-based order and threaten the sovereignty of nations. The United States stands with our allies and partners in the face of these threats.
She referred to a landmark international arbitration in 2016, which denied the Chinese regime's territorial claims in the South China Sea. But Beijing rejected the ruling. In recent years, the Chinese regime has been rapidly building up its military presence to support its claims in the region. Harris sought to reassure America's friends and like-minded nations in the Indo-Pacific.
The United States will pursue a free and open Indo-Pacific that promotes our interests and those of our partners and allies.
Her speech also touched on a number of other issues, including the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. She insisted the decision was courageous and right.
Vice President Kamala Harris is en route to Vietnam after a 3-hour delay. Her flight from Singapore was late because of a possible anomalous health incident in Hanoi. That's how the government usually refers to the mysterious Havana syndrome that has sickened hundreds of U.S. officials over the past few years. There's still no official explanation for the illness. It's known to cause a mix of sensory experiences and physical symptoms, similar to those of a concussion or mild head injury. Some experts believe these might be a result of microwave weaponry. The U.S. Embassy in Hanoi says after careful assessment, Harris decided to continue on to Vietnam for the last leg of her Asia trip. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen recently approved a $7 billion budget bill that aims at mass missile production. It comes amid the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan after the Taliban seized Kabul last week. In an attempt to draw Taiwan closer, Beijing tried to portray the U.S. as an unreliable, weak power. Responding to the chaos, Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen said the island needs to be stronger, more united, and more resolute in protecting ourselves, given the growing military threat from Beijing. According to Taiwanese media, the defense bill is expected to be sent to Taiwan's legislature by early September. If passed, the funds would be used to mass-produce missiles with precision and long-range capabilities. A Chinese diplomat in Japan was counterattacked by Japanese netizens. This after he posted a caricature mocking the U.S. The Chinese Consul General in Osaka City posted on his Twitter account last week, mocking the U.S. military, saying U.S. planes bombed Afghanistan in 2001, and their planes dropped people while withdrawing from the country this year. This triggered a backlash among Japanese netizens. Some responded with a tank man photo from Beijing's Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989 and dead bodies on the streets. Some posted in an illustration of a Chinese plane dropping the CCP virus or coronavirus and a Taiwanese plane dropping medical supplies, while others said this kind of behavior coming from a diplomat was shameless and indecent. The tweet caricature is not an isolated incident. Back in April, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs satirized the Japanese government's decision to discharge nuclear wastewater into the sea. For this, they changed one of the famous ancient Japanese ukiyo illustrations. This is not the first time Chinese diplomats have mocked the U.S. online. The Chinese embassy to Japan once tweeted that the U.S. was knocking on Egypt's door, and the illustration satirized the U.S. as the god of death. The Chinese embassy in Japan later took the tweet down, following the controversy that ensued. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is retaliating against a Malaysian singer after he posted online deriding the regime's authoritarian rule and comparing it with the Taliban.
A social media post titled 8 Tips for the Taliban made a splash in China last week. The post's author, a Malaysian singer, appears to be comparing the Chinese regime's totalitarian rule to that of the Taliban. But it didn't take too long for Chinese authorities to take notice. They quickly suspended his account on Weibo, a popular Chinese social media platform. The post ironically proposes what the Taliban must do to hold on to power in Afghanistan. But the steps outlined exactly match Beijing's tactics for maintaining control. The post first suggests that the Taliban block foreign websites like Facebook, YouTube, and Google. Then it advises setting up Taliban-run news websites and social media apps. That's so citizens will only have access to news produced by the Taliban, with no outside information or influence. The post also ironically proposes establishing concentration camps and black jails. These suggestions echo many of the Chinese regime's strategies that have been in play for years, from its internet censorship firewall to its persecution of prisoners of conscience, to its suppression of ethnic minorities in China's northwestern Xinjiang region. But the post doesn't stop there. Next is that the Taliban should create a giant statue of its leader and place it at the gates of the presidential palace. And that's on top of putting up slogans in the streets and brainwashing students through their schools. During China's Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, authorities came up with an endless stream of propaganda slogans. At the same time, China also saw a nationwide trend of building statues idolizing former communist leader Mao Zedong. What's more, the Post advises the Taliban to urge citizens to attack criticism of authorities online, a prospect that bears a striking resemblance to China's so-called 50-cent army, a group of state-backed internet users paid to praise Beijing and its policies online while attacking anyone who questioned or criticized the regime. What more does the Taliban need to do? According to the Post, it should pay foreigners to sing patriotic songs about Afghanistan and make patriotic movies. While in China, two films called Wolf Warrior 2 and Operation Red Sea swept the country's box office in recent years and received massive attention on social media.
China's taking the opportunity of American troops leaving Afghanistan to criticize the U.S. But U.S. soldiers pulling out could cause trouble for China. The regime may be worrying about the chaos in Afghanistan reaching Pakistan, its partner in a Belt and Road initiative. NTD's Don Ma has more.
As instability worsens in Afghanistan, is China growing worried for its international infrastructure projects? Beijing's controversial global project has been criticized for trapping developing countries in heavy debt. It's called the Belt and Road Initiative. Neighboring Afghanistan is the South Asian country Pakistan. Beijing has invested heavily in the country as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, out of all the Belt and Road countries, Beijing invested in the most in Pakistan, reportedly around $63 billion. The stakes are high, so a chance that the chaos in Afghanistan could reach Pakistan may not have gone unconsidered by Beijing. China has not forgotten about the suicide bombing that was carried out at a hotel where the Chinese ambassador was staying. It's also unlikely that China has forgotten about the attack on a bus in the country last month. A blast targeting a bus killed 9 Chinese Belt and Road workers who were employed in building a hydroelectric dam. The project was valued at around $4 billion. Earlier this month, Pakistan had blamed the attack on the Taliban. A China relations analyst at American think tank Rand Corporation says that there could be some tension between China and Pakistan if they don't figure out the Taliban terrorist situation.
There could be a fair amount of tension between China and Pakistan, who are normally, very okay with each other or the best of friends, if they can't get this terrorism problem resolved. If Pakistan is not willing to leverage its relationship with the Taliban for counterterrorism purposes in the way that China sees fit, then China and Pakistan may have some issues as well.
Beijing doesn't want its failed Belt and Road project in Venezuela 6 years ago to repeat again in Pakistan. China had invested billions in Venezuela, hoping that the country could repay it with their oil. But in 2014 and 2015, various oil commodity prices plunged, and China suffered huge losses. Don Ma, NTD News.
China's fertility rate is on track to becoming the lowest in the world. That's according to Chinese state-run media Global Times. In 2020, the country's fertility rate was 1.3 children per woman. It's the first time the rate has fallen below 1.5 since a nationwide census 10 years ago. The fertility rate is the average number of children that women in a population bear over their lifetime. When the fertility rate falls lower than 2.1, the country's population starts to decline. In comparison, the U.S.'s fertility rate is around 1.78 as of 2020, and no other major Western country has a fertility rate higher than 2.1. Global Times says that China's already low rate could continue declining, and the country's demographic would also grow older. In response to this, Beijing introduced a 3-child policy. They also removed overbirth penalties, meaning that families with more than 3 children would not be fined. But so far, this is having a limited effect. This is because many young couples in China can't afford more children.
I have 2 children now. My first is 4 years old and the younger baby is 5 months old. I don't have any plans for a 3rd child. Just 2 is good enough because we are already under huge pressure now. We wouldn't be able to afford the cost of a 3rd child. Because we're living in a big city such as Beijing, the work pace is fast. and it isn't easy to make money. So I think having a third child isn't at all realistic. It's mostly women bearing the responsibility of raising children, for the most part. And this society hasn't provided women with much support. Thinking of the big picture, realistically, I don't want to have a second child, and the third is even more impossible.
A specialist in Chinese demographics at the University of Wisconsin, Yifu Xian, says China should stop its family planning policies. He says the two-child policy had already not met expectations. And now that there's a three-child policy, he says China is in an endless trap. It seems even China's elites can't escape forced demolitions anymore. Local authorities are knocking down a Beijing villa, despite a court ruling against it, and with no compensation in sight.
Beijing authorities are tearing down a neighborhood construction project in one of the city's districts, claiming the project is illegal. Forced demolition in the area started last week. The group of properties is known as Badaling Village. Homeowners there are mostly elites from all walks of life. Among them, leaders of China's most prestigious scientific institutions, leaders of large state-run companies, professors from renowned universities, and members of Beijing's high-level political organs. Before moving in, they all signed contracts that guarantee their title certificates, meaning their full ownership of the property. Those documents make the new forced demolition initiative illegal. After homeowners were notified, a number of them sued local town hall authorities. Later, a court ruled that no one has the authority to tear down the properties by force. Despite the court's judgment, the property destruction continues. Video from the scene also reveals that authorities deployed large numbers of riot police. The officers are tasked with blocking the entrance to the demolition site and keeping homeowners out. Multiple excavators working together can destroy homes in a matter of minutes. The Epoch Times reached out to the town hall but did not receive a response. According to an insider familiar with the matter, the homeowners have zero fault in this case, noting that authorities built and sold the properties and that they issued the original licenses for construction. The Epoch Times spoke to one of the homeowners who asked to remain anonymous.
But the local authorities is not willing to pay for the relevant certificate, so the application for title certificate is delayed. This problem exists for a very long time.
A Beijing lawyer also shed light on the situation, stating that retroactive action would prove nearly impossible at this point. He says competing with the Chinese people for profit is in the Chinese regime's nature.
As for the profits, the town hall now has sold almost all their lands and consumed the profits, but it still must pay for the huge expense. So it will compete for people for profit and grab whatever profit they can take from the Chinese people. It's the most important.
Earlier this month, the district mayor attended a Q&A meeting. There, she announced that anyone who voluntarily cooperates with the teardown will receive about $5 per square foot as compensation. The villa's homeowners, on average, invested over $1.5 million per property. As for those who resist the demolition, authorities will continue by force, and the resistor will be held responsible for all associated expenses. She added that authorities would collect the money by legal means. One homeowner who spoke about the situation says those in power nowadays lack knowledge and respect.
We trust it because it's a government project with its authentication. We trust it because it's a government project with its endorsement. Never thought the authority not only refused to issue certificate, but also demolish our homes.
Demolition efforts in the district are ongoing.
A Chinese man was caught while trying to stow away to Taiwan on Sunday. The discovery marks the third case of its kind for the week. According to Taiwan's Coast Guard Administration, the Chinese national was found paddling his way through the water in a rubber boat. He says he tried to cross over for religious purposes, but Taiwan officials remain suspicious. Taiwan says authorities will strengthen border security and boost inspections in areas neighboring China. A heroic episode in China's latest Delta variant hotspot, Yangzhou City. A neighbor there rescued a kitten after the feline got trapped on a 9th floor balcony. In a video filmed last week, the kitten is first seen on a windowsill, apparently stranded. Later, cat food can be seen on a newly placed plank, stretching in between a balcony window and a corridor. The kitten then walks out of the balcony window and was quickly rescued by a neighbor. According to reports, the kitten's owner wasn't home and the pet was left trapped inside. The neighbor first noticed something was wrong after hearing the cat mewing for several days. The neighbor later noticed the balcony's window was open and came up with a creative solution to get the cat to safety. The kitten's owner may be stuck elsewhere due to active lockdown measures in the city. The kitten is now being taken care of by a resident and is in good condition. The U.S. is open to meeting with North Korean officials anyplace, anytime. That's what Washington's special envoy for the nation says. And he said the U.S. has no hostile intent toward the regime.
The U.S. and South Korea want to bring North Korea back into talks to denuclearize. On Monday, Washington's special envoy for North Korea, Sung Kim, met with his counterpart in Seoul. His visit comes amid a simmering new standoff over Washington and Seoul's annual joint military exercises that Pyongyang warned could trigger a security crisis. The North sees these exercises as a rehearsal for war against it. But Kim tried to tamp down that tension.
The United States does not have hostile intent towards the DPRK. The ongoing U.S.-ROK combined military exercises are long-standing, routine, and purely defensive in nature, and support the security of both of our countries.
He also urged Pyongyang to come to the table.
I continue to stand ready to meet with my North Korean counterparts anywhere at any time.
A brief thaw in relations between the two Koreas in June saw a hotline between the two reopen last month. That was a year after North Korea suspended them. But the moment didn't last. After preliminary training for the exercises began last week, the North stopped answering the phone. State media in Pyongyang has so far also been silent since the start of the drills. That's despite fears that the country could conduct a missile test or take other actions to display its disapproval.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.